r/askreddit. Emergency service dispatchers. What is the scariest call you have ever gotten? One of the first calls I ever took. Woman calls up and asks about the process of filing a restraining order. She discusses how her boyfriend has been abusive and controlling. Mid-conversation the doorbell rings. She puts me on hold, opens the door, and I hear yelling. Guy barges in and starts beating on her, and I'm sitting there helpless listening because I didn't have her address yet. Luckily, I did have her name, and within a few minutes we got her address and got help to her. She was pretty badly injured but lived, and he is still in jail. That call made me doubt myself and if I was in the right profession, but I stuck with it, and it has been a very rewarding, though sometimes sad, profession. I guess that's why it's a good tip to open an emergency call with the address first. I read it somewhere on the pro tips app. That way if you get interrupted, the dispatcher can still send authorities to the location, even if it was just faulty signal. Fuck that guy. One that always sticks with me is the guy who phoned to tell me he'd shot himself in the head. He was slurring his words and sounded drunk. But no, he'd actually shot himself in the head and was dead by the time the crew got there. That was a weird one to get my head around. I also took a call from a 15-year-old kid who came home from school to find his dad hanging. So I had to basically ask him if he was cold, could he cut him down, all the usual, while this poor kid was panicking to hell. And then the kid stops answering my questions. And the dispatcher next to me gets the emergency call from the neighbors saying they don't know what's going on, but there's a kid standing in the street just screaming. I think about that poor kid a lot, and I absolutely detest his father for doing that to him, when he knew his son would be the one who'd find him. Probably the other one that stands out is the call from the woman who'd just been raped. She'd been coming home from a club, and someone had pushed through her door behind her as she unlocked it. When he left, she called me. I still remember the way she screamed when she heard knocking on her door again, and I had to yell at her to try to make her understand it was the police, and not the guy coming back. I didn't sleep well after that night shift at all. My kid's sister got a call last year from her best friend when he came home from school and found his dad unconscious and bleeding out in the tub. I'm incredibly proud of her because she walked him through putting pressure on the wounds and keeping his dad warm while she was also on another phone to the paramedics. Then when the paramedics arrived, she told her friend to make sure the back door was unlocked, and she went over and cleaned up the blood so the kid and his mum didn't have to deal with it. Curious to know if you were obliged to ask the kid to do those things? I am an emergency helicopter dispatcher, so I get calls from EMS in rural areas. First question I always ask is, what is the closest city to the scene? I swear 80% of these people do not know how to pronounce it correctly, and 50% of them do not know how to spell it. One time this guy cut his dick off on bath salts. When he came to, he realized what he did and called us directly. Came to really changes the story here, but I think you meant came to. I prefer this version though. That's bad that they can't even pronounce the name of a local place. The only time I've seen that egregiously was when there was really bad weather on the weekend and the local news station had new hires, new to the area, on news and meteorology. I work for a sheriff's office and a good friend of mine was a dispatcher. I stepped outside one day for a smoke and my buddy was standing there shaking and crying. I asked him what was wrong and he told me that he had just dispatched a call for his best friend. His friend was a former army sniper and had only been out for a few months. He was a volunteer firefighter and was responding to a house fire, rolled the truck, and had been decapitated. Guy had 5 young daughters. That's very sad. Hope the man is better. Was a 911 operator for 10 years. Scariest is probably different than worst. My scariest was an active shooter in a high-rise. Just sitting on the line trying to give the best direction so everyone makes it out okay. And what was your worst, if I may ask? My sister works as a dispatcher. Her first week on the job, she had a man call in, saying he was going to kill himself. He told her that she couldn't do anything to change his mind. He was simply trying to let her know where he could be found. She heard the gunshot through the call. Second one, she had a little girl call in because her dad was unresponsive. She knew that CPR would likely save this man, but the daughter wasn't grown enough and didn't have the strength to perform it effectively. My sister had to tell her to leave the room, Because the longer that girl stayed in there trying fruitlessly to save her father, the more scarred she would become by the experience of watching her father die. Doesn't CPR have a really low success rate anyways? My husband was one of the 6 responders who recovered the children of Chris Watts from the oil batteries he dumped them in last year. It will actually be a year next week. Jesus, that's awful. That was a truly vile case. I'm actually morbidly following the Noah Tomlin case because of the similarities in where the parents chose to dump their murdered children. Not a dispatcher but a paramedic. But a man called, saying his mom had severe chest pains. So we head over to their address in a hurry. However, there was no mom, just the caller waiting for us and then robbing us at gunpoint saying they were going to kill us. He just wanted the drugs, but was quite shocking still. Always going through my mind when entering some shady neighborhood. That person isn't very smart though. You have their address, right? Posted this before. A 3-year-old was at a campground with her family and they let her out of their sight for 20 seconds and she wandered down to a creek and drowned. Her mom found her and her father called in. While I was getting details from the understandable distraught father, a random guy camping there was doing CPR managed to resuscitate her. I can't imagine how her parents felt, but it was like physical weight being lifted off of me. Edit. I'm police dispatcher edit 2. Shitty grammar. This story simultaneously gave me nightmares and then made me sigh with relief. Thanks for that emotional roller coaster. 911 dispatcher here for a large city. I get a little bit of everything and mostly it's BS. But one that stuck with me was something recently. A man called in frantic and it was really hard to get him to calm down. He told me his 35-year-old girlfriend was unresponsive and not breathing. I immediately started giving this guy CPR instructions and he kept screaming I'm sorry my love. Tough morning for the guy no doubt. It hit me that he could have been responsible or the last thing he ever said to her was not pleasant. Never followed up on the call. In this line of work, it's on to the next one. Too busy to think about it. I have millions of people depending on me not to let the last call affect the next one. I don't know what happened other than she was a DOA. Didn't hit me until the next day. My god, that scream was deafening. All I know is there was more to the story. I could hear it in his voice. P's I've heard people shot in real time. Parents trying to revive their dead kids first thing in the morning, but this for some reason hit me. I think the most genuine terror comes from child callers. I had this 5-year-old call in that her dad was growling and wouldn't wake up. Okay, agonal breathing. Probably a heart attack scrambling to get a confirmed address for EMS. PD dispatched to unconfirmed address. Finally confirmed the address and start giving directions on CPR. Nope, she will not touch him because she is scared then bursts into tears. Luckily PD arrived just after she refused and they were able to do CPR until EMS arrived. What good is a 5-year-old giving CPR anyway? Better to have her exit the room and save herself from the memory than to ask a baby to perform something they're not even physically capable of doing. Not a dispatcher but one told me that one time he got a call from a 19-year-old girl. It was late and she was new to driving, in the US. Her car slipped on black ice and went over the bridge. Her car sank in the river and she called 911 and he received it. He tried to keep her calm. Poor girl was an au pair from same country in Africa. She was crying because she was going to die in a foreign country and to make things worse she didn't even know where she was. They couldn't find her fast enough. The dispatch even remembers her last words, tell my sister I'm sorry I left. This story haunts me to this day. And I'm also an au pair. I worked as a jailer for a while after getting out of the Marines. We had a dispatcher who had 2 kids. Both boys, one a pose that was always in jail, the other younger, troubled and riding a dangerous line. She got the call one night that her younger son got shot twice in a drug deal gone wrong at a public park where he was playing ball. He was dead before the helicopter got in the air most likely. The dispatch center was connected to the jail where she had to work less than 50 yards from the man who shot her son. She was pretty tore up. Caller, muffled voice. Me, I can't understand you. What's the location of the emergency? Caller, sounding clearer, like Kermit the Frog, Ives address, I'm going to hang myself. Me, sir, we can help you. Talk to me. What's been happening? Caller, I just want you to move my body before my family get back. Me, please. There's nothing that can't be. Crack gargling silence. I had to stay on the line until I heard police on scene. He had a hands-free kit on. I wasn't even allowed 5 minutes break. I had a breakdown after. I can't describe those sounds. Haunts me to this day. I cannot describe the feeling of being so intimately involved in the moment of such a traumatic death. He gave his pain to me. Edit for context. Suicidal calls and death were common. Part of the job. But this was so sudden. I was the last voice he heard. Also, it was 2 AM on Christmas Day. I was wearing a Santa hat. Looking forward to seeing my family. I had to cancel and went home. Spend the day alone and shaking. I can't share this with people I know. I don't want to spread his pain further. Now I have PTSD. Yay. Hey, you don't have to bear it alone. You can talk about it. You should talk about it. I know you don't want to spread his pain further, but perhaps if we all took a little of that burden from you, the pain can be divided into tiny little bits that each person can hold on to. It might not feel so heavy if the load is shared. My PMS are open if you want to talk to literally anyone. Stay strong, friend. Edit. Wow. I am completely humbled by the responses here. Thank you to everyone who took part in this thread, and thank you to OP for sharing your story. Coming back and reading everyone's responses brought real physical tears to my eyes, and I'm so grateful to be a part of a world with people like you guys in it. Love you all. One thing I know is that the deceased aren't the earthly person they were. Shift your thinking on this one. Consider that his spirit aches for the pain his actions caused you. Consider maybe he's your guardian angel now to make up for it. When I'm grieving the loss of my son, as soon as I realize he would not want me crying my face off while simply driving down a road, I feel his spirit and know that he is not gone. He's riding shotgun. Serious reply here from someone that attempted suicide. First thing, I'm sorry for your pain. I was sick of life in general back in 2001. Struggling with diabetes, grandfather died, was really close to him. My best friend was killed by a drunk driver while riding to university. Yes, in the morning, and the lady was 75 years old. My girlfriend cheated on me. But what got to me most? My business partner decided to hang himself right after the 9/11 attacks in New York City. On his birthday, and he had twin girls. So the hanging part related to your story and brought up the memory. Then I freaked out and overdosed on insulin before going to bed. Taking 5,000 units of insulin. My colleague at work got worried about me because I didn't show up to work. So he came to my apartment and my car was there. He called 911 and the paramedic broke the door open and found me in bed and covered in blood. I was in a coma and biting my tongue during my seizure. Pretty sure it was horrible for the paramedic, and I'm grateful he saved my life. It took a week to get my glucose levels to safe levels, and I'm okay now. I'm still in touch with the paramedic that saved my life and just wanted to share my story. It was selfless of me, and if anyone out there is depressed to the point of suicide, please call someone for help. It's not worth it, and don't put your friends and family in that kind of pain. As someone interested in emergency services, I once asked a man who'd worked the wrecking crews for years how he coped with the worst of it. He said you can't keep it bottled up inside. It'll eat you up. This man had seen whole families burned alive in cars, mothers and fathers who lost their children, the very worst, and he talking was what kept him sane. And I'm inclined to think he's right. You can't keep that sort of darkness inside. Obligatory, not an emergency dispatcher. I had a conversation with one once where we discussed his craziest work stories, and his was taking the call of a man who had just drowned his 2 small daughters in a lake near their house. He had to stay on the phone with the sociopath, asking him questions about the time and location of the murders, until the police arrived to take him into custody. He never did find out if they ever found the children or if either of them survived in the end. I've come into contact with a fair number of sexual predators, child molesters in my line of work, but I never had to interact with them immediately after their crimes and press them for details. It's a lot to ask of someone. I've always had a lot of respect for emergency dispatchers and the folks who run abuse, rape, and suicide hotlines. There was an accident once on a somewhat busy state road here. An older couple in and SUV pulled out onto the road without seeing a motorcyclist that was going well over 100 miles per hour. He rear-ended them, died instantly and plowed through the SUV, landing halfway through the windshield. The SUV flipped a couple times and landed on the passenger side, trapping the wife. Then it caught on fire. At my dispatch center we had 3 of us working at all times, and I don't even know how many 911 calls we instantly got when this happened. Dozens, I'm sure. After I sent the FD and they got on the way, this is a rural area and this intersection was probably a good 10 minutes south of them. Some bystanders managed to get the husband out of the SUV but he died in the helicopter on the way to the hospital, I believe. The wife burned alive. Honestly, the worst part was right after I dispatched the FD. One of the lieutenants on the biggest police department in my county happened to be driving through there with his family and he called 911. I'll never forget how panicked and frantic he was on that call. I had never heard any of our officers like that before, let alone one of the administrators. We were pretty friendly with all of them so it shook me up. After I hung up with him I just started sobbing. Not a dispatcher myself, but the worst call I've heard of involved 2 friends of mine. James was a cop that had been a 911 dispatcher before he got his badge. Al was my former roommate. After I moved out of state, he moved in with James. At the time of this story, James was recovering from an injury and took a shift at dispatch because they were short-staffed. He got a call that very matter-of-factly said, "I am going to shoot myself, please send someone to address to collect my body." He's a little freaked because that's his address. It was Al. He tried to talk him out of it and was still on the phone when Al pulled the trigger. It fucked him up for a while. My mother worked dispatch and got a call from a woman whose husband had locked in a trailer and lit it on fire. The windows had been boarded up and there was no way for her to get out. This was in the 90s, so landline and the call cut out when the cord started to burn. By the time fire and police arrived it was too late. The best she got was from a woman who was very active labor. My mom had to talk her and her teenage daughter through delivering the baby. By the time Ems got there they had healthy baby boy. Not a dispatcher, but when I used to work as a bouncer, I wound up calling 911 several times. Trying to remain calm for an overdose stabbing shooting, and in one case a brutal curb stomping, while talking to the 911 dispatcher while everyone around me was very much not calm was rough. My own life's been saved a couple times by quick and professional dispatchers, and frankly they don't get enough love or credit. Please op, I beg you, make another one with the serious tag. It's a really interesting question. Not 911 but handled a phone where we directed people to resources. Had a lady call me asking what resources were available for someone who had been passed out cold on her chair for 2 hours. I told her to call 911. Had to listen to a guy try and give CPR to his wife after she shot herself in the face. Luckily I worked for the police and not EMS. I was just listening to make sure the gun was secured and that the man didn't do anything crazy before my deputies arrived. I still think about that call a lot. Probably the one when I was just getting off my shift, but we got a late call. The dispatcher sent me the address which was eerily familiar. As the street approached it became clearer and clearer that it was my best friend Bob's house I was dispatched to. As I opened the front door to his house I realized 2 things. One, he forgot to lock the front door, and the second and most important of all, he forgot the serious tag. Come on. You had an opportunity to make this at least 2 paragraphs longer. If you're gonna waste our time, actually waste it. Also, good one. Stroke. Edit. Phone was in my pocket, LMAO. I've taken too many terrifying calls to count that stick with me every day, but I had a guy tell me one time that he was going to cut me up and put me in a stew. Not so much scary to me but hilarious. Real quick question. How TF is it already on 0 votes when I just posted it? You forgot the serious tag, so get ready to hear some bullshit. Not a 911 operator, but my grandpa was a pharmacist.